Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. The Galactic Empire was only in power for a little over 2 decades. All things considered, it was a short-lived political faction. It was ultimately undermined by Palpatine's inability to manage his government's finances. You see, tyranny is sustainable as long as you continue paying the individuals who are enforcing the tyranny. The Rakatans had a slave empire that existed 5 millennia, and they were absolutely vicious to their subjects. I'm sure they ate some of the cuter species. But they kept their own population wealthy and well-fed so that they could continue to oppress the slave class. And also silence any Rakatans who might express feelings along the lines of, "Are we the baddies? Yes, you are, you xenofilth." The Galactic Republic lasted even longer than both of these entities, and it wasn't because the leaders of the Republic were more benevolent and caring of their subjects, although I'm sure it helped a little bit. The real reason why the Galactic Republic lasted as long as it did was because its political and economic and cultural system really did its best to free the individual to pursue whatever they wanted. And so they used the average sentient being's motivations to power the galactic economy, which I think is the most efficient way to do anything. By making a friendly business environment and encouraging trade through policy and security measures, the Republic grew rich just by letting their citizens do what they do best. Now, of course, it's important to balance your private sector's growth with government regulations. If you let either side get too powerful, you are going to see a loss in economic activity. And that will usually lead to, a collapse of social cohesion. And this kind of imbalance is exactly what leads to the decline of the Galactic Republic. The Sith were also constantly standing up and rocking the proverbial canoe that is the Galactic Republic. I also did that once in Lake Washington. Almost died. The late Republic era was marked by the rise of these mega conglomerates, large corporate entities that began to consolidate entire industries and also became more politically active until several business entities were actually given representation in the Galactic Senate. And when one company gets representation, all of the other companies want it as well. These companies had risen to prominence thanks to, good business practices, innovation, just understanding their markets. But at one point they got larger and larger. They tapped out all the markets they could potentially conquer. They destroyed their competitors, and a lack of opportunity made them turn towards government in hopes that more freedom and aid could help them to continue to grow. But of course, as we all know, continuous growth forever is impossible. No matter how much these CEOs and chairmen fight for it, it's just, you can't do it. At one point, you are going to have cycles that are going to reduce your company's growth. You're going to have larger macro events that could destroy everything, like the Clone Wars. So the Republic was heavily weighed down by crony capitalism in the last few decades of its rule, and I guess what surprised everyone is instead of collapsing into a complete, corporatocracy, the Republic actually collapsed into a military-first dictatorship, which no one saw coming. Now, we've covered many of the large industrial manufacturers in the galaxy. Many of these organizations during the Clone Wars chose to support both sides of the conflict through the use of secret subsidiaries and factories. They obviously caused a lot more damage to the galaxy than they, created value. Ultimately, when companies get just way too large and they're no longer reacting to competition or market forces, they just become a drag on everyone else. It's bad for the employees, it's bad for the consumers. Oftentimes, all of that bloat and corruption and excess is bad for the company itself and will hurt its long-term growth and ability to survive. But there is one company that actually followed the traditional way of mergers and acquisitions and became, massive in their respective industry, but they actually provided a lot of value for the galaxy through their products and services. We, of course, are talking about the Nubian-based company known as Industrial Automaton, one of the premier manufacturers of service droids of all different types. Now, Industrial Automaton, as you'll see, has a really good company culture, one that's probably based in Nubian culture. Nubia was a pretty ancient world found in the core regions of the Republic. A lot of these older core worlds have gone through their periods of strife and chaos. They've gone through their political extremism, their expansionist phase, their warrior phase, right? Every culture either survives by maturing and becoming enlightened, or they turn into the Mandalorians, and it's not going to end well for them, despite their TV show, I think. And so the Nubians eventually found this really good balance between economic development and preserving their art and culture, and the natural beauty of their planet. I mean, this was an industrialized world that had companies that produced starships and droids, but their main, export product was actually I believe food stuff. This was an agrarian world with a lot of farmland. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Nubian Star Drive Works. That's one of the major companies on the planet. They collaborated with Theed Palace Engineering to create the N1 Starfighter, along with the Naboo Royal yachts and barges. These were state-of-the-art vessels that blended function with stunning beauty and tradition and a lot of chrome. And so this was a planet that actually had plenty of design talent, engineer talent, and just talent that you would want for an industrial company like Industrial Automaton, or IA, as I'll call it for the rest of the video. IA reached the form that we all know it as in 32 BBY after two successful droid manufacturing companies known as Industrial Intelligence and Automatic Galactica merged together, creating Industrial Automaton. And overnight, it would become one of the largest producer of droids in the entire galaxy, and one of the most important products that this company has created is the Astromech. You see, Astromechs do two very important things. One, they have a large computer brain on which they can store a massive amount of information, including calculations for hyperspace jumps. And two, they're all-around terrific maintenance techs, far better than anything else available in the market. As we see during the High Republic era and most civilized areas of the galaxy, organics were actually not allowed to do maintenance work on the exterior of a starship when traveling through deep space. But the thing is, the utility droids of the era were, pretty limited. They really couldn't think as creatively or do as many things as an organic tech could. And so, a lot of poorly thought out regulations that don't actually consult the industries they're regulating, you do see a lot of organics making spacewalks and doing very dangerous repairs before the invention of the Astromech. The Astromech was really the first droid capable of doing almost everything an organic repair person could, and so the first impact this invention had was to increase the safety of ship mechanics, which is a big thing. I mean, it saved a lot of lives. It saved OSHA's life, which maybe wasn't a good thing. Now, prior to the creation of Astromechs, all hyperspace coordinates were basically created by nav computers, very large and complicated nav computers. Calculating hyperspace jumps is a very difficult and important process because when a ship enters hyperspace, it still needs to avoid colliding into planetary bodies along the way. And so these navigation computers are essentially pouring through ship logs, navigational maps, satellite imagery, and any other information that can let them model out the trajectory of all large celestial bodies that could potentially intersect the pathway your ship is taking. As you can imagine, this is an incredibly complex thing to do with a computer. I mean, it's really complex to even source all of that data in the first place. And this isn't a model that you can make mistakes with, because if you make a mistake here, you might end up flying into a black hole. I mean, this is why when people make blind jumps in Star Wars, it's actually extremely terrifying and risky, because you have no idea where you're going. You could very easily die before you even realize what's going on. And so yeah, hyperspace is complicated. This is also why people had some issues with how the sequels played around with the hyperspace mechanics, whether it was Holdo's maneuver or Han Solo timing his jump so that he could make it inside of that shield gate, that Starkiller, or the First Order and their supercomputer that can predict where a ship jumps through raw calculating force. There's also that scene where Rey, Chewie, Poe, and Finn are on the Millennium Falcon and they make several micro jumps one after another without any calculations, and they somehow survive. I'm usually not a stickler for these things, but I understand the outrage here because, hyperspace mechanics are integral part to how the story of Star Wars has been told, right? A lot of good guys, bad guys have escaped or made great attacks basically by manipulating how hyperdrives work. Whether it's Thrawn or Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, and so when you change the rules, it actually kind of cheapens these previous actions and stories, in my opinion. So basically, in those earlier days, you needed a navigation computer if you were going to calculate any jumps for FTL travel. Now, ships larger than, say, a freighter had enough space on board to actually have one of these consoles. But for most smaller starships, and especially starfighters, you either didn't have hyperdrives on board, or if you did, like with the old Republic Auric-class tactical starfighter, usually squadron commanders would go to a larger ship's nav computer, input all the jumps, and then give it to each individual pilot to download onto their own computers on their ships that are connected to the hyperdrives. There are, of course, hardware limitations when it comes to how many pre-calculated jumps can be uploaded. And obviously, if your squadron ends up leaving that predetermined flight path, you're screwed. You're pretty much stuck in the middle of nowhere unless you want to risk a blind jump. I mean, one thing you can do is make micro jumps where you jump basically based on things you can see in line of sight, but of course that will take forever for you to get anywhere. Now, in the years leading up to the merger of Industrial Automaton, there was a golden age of prosperity in the Republic, which led to many advances in technology and, more importantly, the miniaturization of computer components. And so, while Industrial Automaton's new Astromech droids look kind of similar to the utility droids of the old Republic, like T3M4, the big difference is R2 and BB-8 and Chopper all have far more processing power to analyze star maps. When Industrial Automaton rolled out the first P2 series droid, it was received very well, especially from the independent spacer community, as in like captains of their own small ships, like Han Solo. And for obvious reasons, I mean, these astromechs allowed smaller ships to jump from anywhere in hyperspace without preloaded coordinates. This fundamentally changed how people traveled and how militaries fought. Prior to the astromech, you had to basically map out patrols and hope that you didn't have to deviate too much from your plans. That, or you had to travel with a hub ship or a carrier that had a nav computer. Without astromechs, the long-range patrols used by the Rebellion, the hit-and-run attacks used by the Rebellion, all couldn't have happened. You need an astromech to do that. Pretty soon, most hyperdrive-equipped starships had designated astromech slots built in to fit Industrial Automaton's invention. That's when you know you're doing something right, when other companies are changing their products to accommodate your products. And so when you create new products like an astromech that don't even have a market, you can expect a huge jump in revenue. I mean, most people would invest in a company like Industrial Automaton the second it seems like the P series is going to be successful, because again, you're creating a new product for a new market. And as a first mover, you're going to have a lot of advantages in your own market. You can control the technology and even the standards and infrastructure for that piece of technology. But being a first mover doesn't always guarantee you will have dominance in that industry. Although, if you play your cards right, you can get there. For instance, in 1956, the first true operating system for computers was developed by General Motors. Yes, that General Motors. The operating system was designed for IBM's 704 mainframe computer. Yes, that IBM. And there's a reason why you've never heard of this operating system unless you're like a computer nerd of some kind. And that's because GM and IBM either went into different directions as far as what their company would do, or in IBM's case, they failed to capitalize on their first mover advantage. In 1969, we would see Unix being developed by Bell Labs. And in 1981, you have MS-DOS from Microsoft, which led to the first version of Windows just 2 years later. And then in 1984, you have Mac OS being developed as well. Now, the most interesting thing about Mac OS and Apple is its founder, Steve Jobs. Despite his hippie lifestyle, fruitarian diet, and inspirational quotes, he was actually a ruthless individual. Don't let any Apple worshippers tell you otherwise. Let's just say that people who are smart and who know they're smart and then start seeing that they're able to do things that other people can't, develop a God complex, and they start stepping on people because, they have a purpose, a mission, which in Steve Jobs' case was developing, personal computer devices that were like rounded at the edges. Wait, no, that was Christopher Ives, wasn't it? As you can see, I don't like Steve Jobs. I'm being a little unfair. So I will be fair to him and say this. He did something kind of smart as an early mover. He created a closed operating system. One, because he wanted to control the quality of the apps and programs that were being used on his Mac. The guy was obsessive. That is why he created so many unique products. And by creating this closed system, it meant that people who liked his OS had to use his hardware. And if they used his hardware, they had to also use all of their add-ons and other things built into the ecosystem. I don't really like closed systems. I use PCs all the time for this reason, even though I'm in like the video editing field. And it's more of an ideological thing. It's not rational. But I do have to say, when you trap your customers into your system and kind of force you to stay inside of their systems, like I do have an iPhone and I'm stuck in the Apple infrastructure, it pisses me off. And also it leads to laziness from the design standpoint, because you're not being competitive once again. You're removing competition, which for some reason a lot of corpos think is a good thing, but actually it makes your product stagnate. If I'm Tim Cook right now, I don't really see a future for the company. All Tim Cook really is good at doing is, managing the supply side and the very complicated manufacturing of iPhones, but there's no more innovation at this company. And I think a lot of that has to do with how Steve Jobs laid out the foundation. This isn't important. This is not important. Let's move on. Now, a company like Industrial Automaton had a pretty significant early mover advantage with the Astromech. These are products that they designed from the ground up and are quite unique in how they function. The P-Series Astromech had a wide range of tools that could be stored inside of it, along with, of course, a very powerful computer brain with that programming inside. Now, one way to protect your early mover advantage is by filing patents for your inventions. But if patents work in the Republic in the same way they work in America, well, they might not be the best course of action. Like, they might be a course of action, but you're definitely going to have to do other things to maintain, kind of leadership with your product. I mean, the truth is a lot of companies retain a certain number of lawyers, and their job isn't just to react to any legal problems the company might encounter. A lot of times when they don't have lawsuits to fight, they're supposed to be proactive and actually generate revenue for the company, usually in the form of fines, patent violations, and other things like that. It's a necessary evil of bureaucracy. And now that I think about it, when Industrial Automaton was creating the Astromech in the last few decades of the Republic, not only was bureaucracy and corruption strangling the system, you literally had corporate entities in control of a good percentage of the Senate's votes. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that in the Republic, the patent process has also become kind of one of those kind of archaic systems, right, that don't do anyone good and blocks innovation. When companies do shenanigans like this, corporate sabotage, and forget to focus on their product, they almost always suffer in the long run. There are no shortcuts in life, and even for businesses who have, a longer landing strip than, the average human does, but they go bankrupt too. They get in trouble as well. Whether you're Sam Bankman-Fried getting diddled for the next 25 years or Newt Gunright, who just got deaded. Industrial Automaton made the right choice, though. Instead of focusing on all that nonsense, they focused on just building a good product. It's as simple as that. Not only did they proceed to upgrade the P2 Astromech, they developed several niche lines of Astromechs for different budgets and uses. This is actually a pretty interesting move. Usually with product launches, when you launch your first actual non-prototype, machine vehicle, you're going to launch one thing that's probably packed with features, is luxurious, and is designed to attract the eye of, the more wealthy consumer who has disposable income. You want to build your brand up to have a really solid and valuable feeling. It's only after you get that brand settled do you start rolling out products for the wider market as demand picks up. Usually when you're manufacturing anything from a blaster or a starship, profitability is only reached with volume. But Industrial Automaton is different. They bet on the fact that their Astromech, their P2 series Astromech, was going to launch a revolution in droids, and they were right. But instead of trying to block other firms from creating competing products, they analyzed their P2 series Astromechs, found its weaknesses, and developed products that would kind of compete against their own prototype. This is what you always want to do. Put yourself in the mind of your enemy. And what does Industrial Automaton come up with? Well, they come up with 8 individual product lines of Astromechs, one that fits each one of the niche markets they believe are going to be important for the future of this market. In hindsight, this is a crazy move, but Industrial Automaton is not a startup. It's actually a pretty large legacy company, like we talked about before, and so it has the capital and it has the courage to make a pretty surprising move. Because launching even one product is a tiring process. These products usually need to be refined and upgraded within the first few months of launch. There are recalls sometimes if there's some major issues. I'm sure when IA shareholders heard about this, they either just, took their life savings and bet it all on IA, or they, sold all their holdings. This was a risky move. Ultimately, a lot of these lines didn't perform well. For instance, the C series of Astromechs was barely profitable. I didn't actually get the Valley Line report of the company when it released the C series, but I'm guessing the bigger problem was that when you don't wipe the memory banks of a C series droid, it starts committing war crimes. I mean, that's a liability. However, the C series doesn't need to make that much money. It doesn't even need to be profitable. As long as not every product is losing money and one is successful, that's usually enough. That was Industrial Automaton's crazy bet, and yes, it ultimately works out for them. One of their product lines rose above everyone else, and that was the Starfighter-focused R-Series Astromech. And this thing was really just a perfect blend of computing power, excellent build quality, and design. And soon after the R1's huge success, IA followed it up with the launch of the legendary R2 unit, which became one of the most widely used Astromechs in the late Republic era. The R2 was really the sweet spot in the series, and many of these R2 units would outlast newer models, especially the R5, which was a budget R-Series that was prone to breaking down. You also had the R-Series, which had faster processing abilities. And then Industrial Automaton wasn't against having collaborations with other corporations like Quad Systems Engineering. When they were designing the Delta 7 Ether sprites, they created a hull that was far too small and thin to accommodate a full Astromech. And so IA and Quad Systems Engineering developed the R4P, which keeps the droid's computer and processing domain intact, but then decentralizes all of its other components across the surface of the ship to allow the droid to fit onto the Delta 7's thin wing. Overnight, the R-Series exploded in popularity. I mean, their bet not only paid off, it it turned them into the company. You know, they were like Tesla before people realized that, you know, maybe those cars are overvalued. They were like Nvidia before people started realizing, oh, maybe those chips are overvalued. But Industrial Automaton had all the right things going for it. Like Nvidia and Tesla, Industrial Automaton had early mover advantage with his Astromechs. Like Nvidia had a monopoly over pricing. But unlike Nvidia, Industrial Automaton also had manufacturing and fabs. And so Industrial Automaton could control the cost of its products much better. Plus, its factories aren't only making Astromechs, they're also being sustained by dozens of other products from their design team. Yeah, long before the Astromech was even invented, IA was creating a wide range of different droids, like the fearsome DTS series Dismantler droid, along with the less scary ASP series Labor droid. Industrial Automaton was also the creative minds behind the idea of a walking power bank with the creation of the Gonk and Plonk droids. I mean, these things got so popular that like religions, you know, sprouted up around them somehow. And there's a lot more to it. You know those training remotes used by the Jedi? That's also IA. What about the T1B series medical droid? I heard despite having terrible bedside manners because of the, you know, giant metal claw and giant syringe, they were still quite good at performing very delicate surgeries and procedures. And then there was the RX series pilot droids, which were often built into ships directly. You know, if you think about it, a lot of the products that IA created before already had a lot of research and development invested into them, and a lot of that was actually used in the Astromech, if you look closely. I'm sure the engineers and techs who were behind designing the T1B series delicate arms and finger appendages were also the ones who made sure that the R2 series could have tools that were strong enough to withstand the dangers of a spacewalk, but also be delicate and precise enough to fix a leaked coolant line. The remote droids obviously gave the R series more combat avoidance capabilities. We've seen that Astromechs, when given their freedom, can be quite courageous and even deadly in a firefight. And then the RX series pilot droid, well, it's clear that the programmers who wrote the automated driving code also helped develop the R series piloting capabilities. The fact that Industrial Automaton made Astromechs makes a lot of sense because in a lot of ways their tech tree was naturally progressing towards the creation of a droid like this. And this is exactly what you want to see out of a growing company. You don't want to see stock buybacks. You don't want to see like, you know, them spending money on all this flashy marketing and saying crazy things on CNBC. You want to see solid products. That's what matters the most. But yeah, I like Industrial Automaton. I go as far as to recommend you doing some research yourself and considering it for your financial portfolio. Although I have to mention that shortly after the creation of the Astromech, the Clone Wars started, and well, let's just say everyone in the galaxy started being afraid or started hating droids, which is just the nature of the market. It's unpredictable. You want to protect yourself from crazy space wizards who want to see the world burn. But ultimately, investing is not for everyone, and never invest money that you can't afford to lose. And more importantly, never trust an individual who tells you that they're 100% certain that their stock tip is going to work out. Because, you know, never tell me the odds. I just want to see the fundamentals. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, and I am under legal obligation to remind you that I am not a fiduciary. I am just a humble spice trader, smuggler, trader.